Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to the podcast. I got my friend here, fellow collaborator, Dani Mariathas. How are you, buddy? How's everything?
Not bad, Daniel. How are you?
I'm good, man. I'm just surviving, just
Yeah,
not
yeah.
knowing what's happening next. A
I
lot of
feel you.
uncertainty, but
Yeah,
just
yeah.
staying creative. I'm sure you're doing the same.
Absolutely. I mean, for all of the other bad things, and there are a lot of bad things about this current
Of
situation, let's
course,
be
yeah.
real. But it sure is kind of conducive, at least for me, to be creative.
hmm
I don't know why. I don't know if it's the oppression of the situation. I don't know if it's the lack of kind of external motivators and stuff, or not motivators, but just external things being able to influence you. um you just don't get that many opportunities to do that in the current climate. So
Yeah.
I feel like there's a lot more opportunity for things internally to bubble up to the surface.
This is a great opportunity to just take advantage, go full force. I don't know about you, but when I used to try to pursue these creative projects in the past, like the vlogs or the podcast, I would always reach a bump because I was working or I was just getting caught up in, that part-time job, the full-time job, wherever I was in my career. And I really never kind of delved into this passion of mine, this thing that I wanted to do all my life, to at least say I tried it, I gave it a shot.
For sure. Yeah.
So it's really important that people see that side, that there is a bright side to everything. I don't know your situation. It could be very grim on your end. I'm not arguing with you on that. However, you really do need to, if you're in a situation where you want to pursue your dream or there's a hobby that you want to pick up, this is the best time. This is the time where things just slow down and you're able to just catch up. And it worked out
it's an
for my favor. Yeah.
yeah, it's an opportunity, wouldn't you say, to invest in yourself, right?
Invest in
Whereas
yourself.
before,
Exactly.
yeah,
Look inward. Yeah. Look inward. And
yeah.
especially because I'm in my 20s, right? And if you're in your
Mhm.
30s, anyone that's in that age group, I know we joke around, we're getting old. I see it all the time on those Instagram posts, but the reality
Mhm.
is we're so young. I talk to my parents
I
that
mean,
are in their late 50s, and they're the ones that are saying, no, no, no. When you reach that age, and even a lot of people would argue that age is you know what I mean, still young. But I know what they're saying
yeah,
is you don't realize how young you are until you're at that point in your life, right?
where you're
So
properly old. Yeah, no,
yeah, where
100%.
you're properly old and you're actually classified as, a senior, right? Or
Yeah,
middle
yeah.
aged. Your 20s is your breaking. This is your stomping ground. This is the time to, get dirty, get your hands dirty, and do whatever it takes, really, to pursue your passion.
No,
And
100%.
yeah, so on that note, I have to say this right out of the blue because I talked to a number of people so far on this podcast, and majority of them are in film. And what's striking about yourself is you fully embrace writing, something a lot of people don't even have the courage to look at the blank page. They had openly admit it because, again, like I said, it takes a lot of courage to do so. What is
Yeah.
so? I highly commend you on that
I
because, yes, I have to say it's very admirable. But what is it about writing that you chose out of all the roles in filmmaking that writing is your thing?
I mean, I think it speaks for, I think it worked differently for a lot of different people. For me, it was definitely partly, in large part, because I was really introverted, quite young. I grew up in Montreal, which in of itself, if you're an Anglo in a Franco area, you're already kind of on an
Yeah.
island, so to speak. And then if you're an Anglo and you're brown in an area that's predominantly Franco and not
There's a
so
lot of
much
things
with
working
the
against you.
ethnic. Yeah, yeah. So I was kind of put in a situation early on where I was an observer.
Mm,
And you inherently you become a student of human character, of psychology, the mechanisms of kind of human interaction and the ecology of small sample sizes
right.
society, right?
hmm
And within that, so once you kind of are forced to sit back and observe, as opposed to being, because when you're in it and you're partaking fully, I feel like you're kind of not probably given the bandwidth to be able to soak in everything that's happening, especially on a more granular level. That wasn't a problem for me, Daniel, because
Yeah.
based on where I was at, like I observed kind of everything from everybody's story, not just my own. I didn't have the luxury of being preoccupied with my own story, which was really good. It worked out really well because I could gain an appreciation for everybody else's, you know what I mean? And once you do that, you kind of start to see the pieces or the connections between pieces, between people, between situations that bleed into people and people that bleed into situations, and the emphasis that one can have on the other. And I feel like that gave me the ability or the appreciation for storytelling. And I think as a writer, and I'm sure you can relate as well. I mean,
Yeah, for sure.
you've got a writing background, and even as with your directing background as well, you're still kind of in the gig of storytelling, right? And as a writer, primarily, you've got an appreciation for stories and the telling of the stories and the integrity and the authenticity of the story, from the standpoint of like, okay, well, does this character belong in this situation? Does it make sense? Is it authentic that this character would react in this way? And it's funny, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about it too, but like, don't you find that often a good story idea can come from like the most randomest of things?
Yeah, a great story does come from literally the most random, acts of inspiration. Sometimes when you least expect it. I guess the cliche thing is when you're in a shower. That's actually happened to me multiple times. Yeah, like where an idea will strike. I think there's something therapeutic about the water hitting your back or something that you just like. Maybe the creative juices are flowing a different way. But yeah, with regards to storytelling, I think, like you said, with regards to writing or directing, the best stories are the best form of inspiration I've identified in my works, where it comes from my past. It comes from a place where I want to tell my stories. And, the stories that we've created, even the one that we collaborated with last called Cracked, written with you and Kosa, that story, what I explained to you and him is I was going through some mental illness, some kind of a low part of my life, and I wanted to apply it as best as I could, express it through my role as the director, as the cinematographer, and ultimately the editor. And that's where what I'm saying is, regards to storytelling, the best stories, this is why, again, Tarantino, this is why I love Scorsese, is they use the experiences in their past to make this best story possible, to make it most authentic, as you were saying.
Authentic, yeah.
Exactly. The word authentic is what's very key. And that's why you and I have collaborated and plan to collaborate more, because we value that word authenticity, to not compromise, just for the sake of compromising or for the sake of
100%.
appealing to just a niche market. We compromise only if it's going to make sense. It's always for the sake of the story, right?
Yeah.
So that's very important. What
actually,
you said.
and
go ahead.
And if I could kind of carry that thought just like another one step forward, is when you're in that situation as a writer, and you're working with a director and a cinematographer and an editor, you wore a lot of hats on that one, Daniel.
Yeah, no, I did. Yeah, I was a caterer too. I brought paninis.
You know what? I don't know if I'm gonna give you the best marks on that one. But,
yeah, I know, right? I got food Danny's like, I got food poisoning.
Yeah, no, that was a weak part, man. I wouldn't put that on the resume. Just
like that joke I made from the caterers of Cracked. That's gonna be my credit on the next project.
No, absolutely. Just don't, I don't know if you're gonna get the best of reviews necessarily. Like, if anyone calls me for a reference, Daniel, I'm gonna have to be honest. But no, like, as a writer, when you're working with a director and an editor, you know what, the whole cast that we worked with on Cracked, I mean, the outside of the work and outside of the talent that everybody kind of brought forward, the authenticity that kind of everyone lended towards, and you can kind of see it in the final product, is that it's just that much better for it, and but you can't come up with that if you don't have the proper story, and to circle back to your question, it's, I think, a major part of why people feel a little bit of I don't know, a little bit of weight, when they take on telling a story, because the authenticity is something I feel most people, if not all, inherently feel an obligation for. Whether or not it's executed is a completely different matter, which we'll touch on that, I'm sure, later, as
For
far as
sure.
the technical demands of screenwriting is a story in of itself. But yeah, just the weight that kind of comes with telling a story, especially if it comes from a real place. Like,
Of course.
you mentioned Scorsese, and like I know you and I both kind of worship at the altar of
Of
Tarantino,
course.
but Scorsese, I think in this particular example, with the topics and the characters that he's you know told stories about, I don't think he had a whole lot of wiggle room to get it wrong. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, for
um,
sure.
yeah,
Well, he grew up
and I
with, I
think,
wanted to interject, he grew up with that community. The reason why he makes a
yeah,
lot of movies revolving around violence or mobs, the
yeah,
mafia, is because that was his reality when he was growing up, and that's why he has such a sympathy towards these characters, and that
sure,
provides such a three dimensionality to them, is because he explains
yes,
they were
yes,
real people to me. They were people that
yeah,
you would say
yeah,
hi to. They were people that your dad would know, and it would
yeah,
be a disservice. It would be unjust for
yes,
him to
yes,
make them cartoons. And when I heard that, I
absolutely.
said, this is why we admire him. This is what makes a good movie.
Hmm.
A lot
Yeah.
of things, like a lot of people that get into or want to pursue film or writing, or try to view the art form, they got to look at it from a science. Like there's you have to reverse engineer it. What I did
Yes.
when I
Yeah.
was starting out is I would say I would get a lineup of all my favorite movies or directors, and I say, what made them a good movie? No, and I said to
Hmm.
myself, no, seriously, there's something there that made it a good movie. It wasn't because it was just the music or the shots. There was something going on that I need to know. I need to understand.
Hmm.
And that's when you start dissecting the story and you start learning terms again, like three dimensional, right? Parallels, foreshadowing, paying off,
Hmm.
climactic scenes. These kinds of uses in writing help you to understand why you as a viewer are drawn to these powerful stories, why you keep going back, that rewatchability. Yes, there's all those perks, those are the music that they put, the score, and again the very
Hmm.
stylistic shots and their own spin on directing. But it always goes back to the core of the story and how they present it. It's a very unique way, and it's something that I feel any great filmmaker that aspires for greatness would want to aspire to, right?
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, I'm so glad you used that word, three dimensional, because there's such a, and not to knock those particular offerings, but I feel like the audience now is such a more well-versed, knowledgeable audience that you couldn't get away easily with doing kind of like caricatures of people, and expecting it to fly or expecting it to be successful, because I feel like now there's such a value put on having layered stories, and
Hmm.
not to say there's still not a market for like kind of light viewing, or the odd kind of
Yeah,
just
guilty pleasure.
silly fare. Yeah,
Yeah, turn off
100%
your
guilty
brain,
pleasures.
popcorn flicks. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. There's still a demand for that, and as there should be. But I think that the opposite end of the coin is so much more appreciated now than it ever was, really,
Of
and
course.
true. I truly do believe that. There's such an appreciation for the artists that contribute. Like, I don't believe at any other point we've had such a wide appreciation of like things like showrunners, or screenwriters, like, of course actors and directors have been held up on a pedestal, and deservedly so, right? But now, like, we're getting so much more appreciation for this full spectrum of it, and I think that that's a good thing. It pushes people to continuously push themselves, because they're being held up to a standard that's a finite almost standard now, and that's great. That's fantastic. I love that personally.
Well, it pushes the art form, right? And
Absolutely.
that's all you that's what you really want to see. Television for the longest
Yeah.
time was regarded as, where
Yes,
actors
good
go to die
example.
kind of thing, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
look at it now. Back to what you were saying
100%.
about
Yeah,
taking it to a new level and the appreciation
yeah.
of three-dimensional characters, right? There's some sitcoms, sitcoms were notorious for that, where they're just kind of cartoon characters, running
Mm-hmm.
around. They have their own situations. And again, they're not the greatest form of television. However,
Mm-hmm.
there were the few that came by that,
Mm-hmm.
would attempt that three-dimensional characters. And that's why they're still with us. That's why they became part of pop culture. But
Yeah, but it's a
yeah,
shame that when you look back, a lot of them didn't last as long as I think they would last now if given the same kind of, and if
no,
given an opportunity now, you know what I mean?
no, yeah.
It's, which kind of sucks.
Television, there was a nice innocence to it, like a charm,
Mm-hmm.
how the sitcoms were made, because there was a
Mm-hmm.
time when, like you were saying, it didn't have to be so brooding and three-dimensional. It didn't have to, you didn't have to invest in all the flaws of the characters, and really discover, who they are at their core. But I think art is always a reflection on life and reality and what's happening.
True.
And I think this is
Yeah.
the best time for the art form, and for those, like ourselves, that would want to tell a gritty, dark story, because I think people want to learn about what's real life, because life isn't black and white. Life isn't
No.
so, you look at it at first glance. Like, I'm watching a CNN documentary special report on Abraham Lincoln, and I'm just
Mm-hmm.
learning like some new things about him, because, again, he's revered, and he still is, as, the person who freed the slaves. Yet it wasn't like he went in there with that purpose. There was
Mm-hmm.
his biggest goal, his primary goal, was to preserve the Union more than anything. And at one point, he even
Mm-hmm.
negotiated, with Frederick Douglass about, perhaps sending black people to Central America to make everything right. Like, I'll save your
Hmm.
people that way. And he was, you know, obviously against that, and insulted, saying they're just as much citizens of the U.S. as white people. So it's a very that was actually pulled from that piece of knowledge was pulled from a documentary series I'm watching. It's with Will Smith. It's called Amend on Netflix.
Okay. All right.
Yeah,
No, I haven't seen
check
it.
it out. It's really cool. I was watching the first part last night. It was about citizenship. And
Mm-hmm.
again, not that he was a bad man, but that's what I mean by three dimensional is he's not a black and white figure. He was human just like us. And
Yeah.
yes, he was a good man. Like, he had a good soul. He wasn't a racist, but he also, things were more complex than they appeared,
Of course.
right? He
Yeah.
was trying to preserve a country. He was trying
Mm-hmm.
to do what was best for the future generations. And it's easy to look back and say, how it's so easy, just abolish slavery. It's just how could you not do it? Yes, of course, it's very easy. But in those times, and what he was dealing with, and the amount of pushback he was going through, again, it's not as straightforward. It's easier to look back and say, oh, that makes sense, you should have done it like this. But in the moment, think about what the person's going through. And I guess that's what we can apply to storytelling, really, is the viewer, the audience member will have moments where they'll scream, or I'll catch it with the person I'm watching it with, saying, why didn't that character pick up the knife? Why didn't he? And I
Mm-hmm.
remind them, I say, no, but this is the problem. And this is what you have to look at, is the character picks up the knife, doesn't sorry the character doesn't pick up the knife because of what they're going through in the story, not we as an audience, what we would do in that situation. It's what the character would
Right.
do in that situation. And
Sure.
you have to look at, now an effective, a really powerful writer will execute those notes and make it convincing. Like, you won't even ask that question, why is he not picking up the knife? But even the best writing, there are people that will still question and say, hit him again, or why isn't
Mm-hmm.
he, getting upset in this situation? And you have to look at it from the character's perspective. You have to always
Yeah.
project yourself in there.
Yeah. I mean, there's also something to be said as well for cinematic tropes or tendencies within kind of Western filmmakers,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Versus international.
For sure.
I find that at a I, perhaps this isn't as true now, but certainly previously decades past, right? Like, I felt there was a lot more innovation being offered within storytelling um, that came from abroad versus here in North America, where filmmakers were a lot more beholden to the demand of the audiences who had grown accustomed to, and I'm not shitting on Die Hard or
Yeah.
anything like that,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
I want to see John McClane go beat up some more terrorists. I want to see Schwarzenegger go find some more guns. and then meanwhile over in Japan you've got like these cinematic masterpieces, and you've got like, Old Boy, coming out, and like these are
Brand and
really kind of like tackling
yeah,
complex, really daring storytelling, and it's and if I can kind of go off on a quick tangent, we're
for
seeing
sure.
a very similar thing kind of in the music industry right now,
Hmm.
because you see out in like places like South Korea and Japan where like they're being so fearless with their blending and fusion of different kind of musical elements, and like I'm kind of curious as to what it is about it from a societal standpoint that allows for that kind of freedom creatively. But it certainly seems that at this point in time here in North America, we're reaching a similar kind of point, in at least in terms of filmmaking, um and you were talking about like gritty films in
Yeah,
particular. um there's an appreciation to that art form now, because there's an appreciation, I feel, to the stories and the themes that can be tackled with it, which isn't to say
for
that
sure.
those same themes can't be tackled. Like, you've watched the new Blade Runner,
Yeah,
or the new
2049, right?
Blade Runner, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
It's amazing how, like, for such a visually, and you must have an appreciation for this as
Oh
obviously
no,
somebody
you know me
you're
so
right,
well, man.
like,
That's
yeah,
exactly the style that I love, like the lighting.
yeah,
Yeah, it was beautiful palette, color palette. Yeah,
absolutely gorgeous,
gorgeous,
right?
gorgeous.
Like
Yeah,
the
absolutely. Yeah.
cinematography is like next level, but like the
Hmm.
story itself is such a, for it's number one, it's a simple story when you break it down to, when you
Very simple.
dilute it to its
Yep.
core, and there's some real risks being taken there, there's some real questions. Another one actually, and this is kind of seem kind of random going from, but actually maybe not, because it's also another Ridley Scott flick, Prometheus. Have you seen it
Yes,
by
Prometheus.
chance?
Yeah.
A
Yeah, of
lot
course.
of
I vaguely remember it. I probably have to rewatch it again.
mhm.
But yeah, I know there was a lot of problems. A lot of people were commenting like things didn't add up or make sense. I liked it from a visual standpoint. I thought it was another
Yeah,
gorgeous film to look at. But yeah,
yeah.
curious to hear your thoughts.
I mean, I agree with you. I think visually it was a stunning film. Like, the choices that were made, not just for the characters and the antagonists, the engineers as they were called, but just like the world that Ridley Scott kind of created for it was just amazing, on par, in my opinion, with Blade Runner. But putting that aside, like, there's some real questions being asked there, and maybe that's something that kind of threw off people, is like some of those questions didn't get an answer to our liking, and
Hmm.
that's fair. I feel like that's something that, another imposition that writers, directors, editors feel, cinematographers, is the need to kind of have everything wrapped up in a bow, at the
Yeah,
end, in a
yeah.
conclusion. Like, sometimes that just doesn't work that way, like you ask questions that are ahead of you, so you're not there sufficiently enough to be able to answer the question, and that's okay. Like, we don't watch movies for tutorials. We watch movies to kind of be expanded, and have our creative juices challenged and provoked, and I feel like Ridley Scott did that with, and I'm saying that as somebody who's not necessarily the biggest Ridley Scott fan as well, if I'm
That's
being
great.
honest.
Yeah,
Like,
it's a testament.
the dude, like, it, it's you're probably, or you're people are probably gonna want to crucify me on this one, but like Michael Bay,
Hmm.
he's constantly trolled for like for
But I
his, like,
respect him because he
I
he he
do,
does
man.
he in a way, because Michael Bay is not trying to be something he's not.
No,
He loves
yeah,
he says he's like, I love explosions, I love girls, I love
yeah,
like women, whatever. I love all these. I like flat eye candy. I love making it flashy. And Tarantino, who's highly respected in the industry, actually called him once and said, "Hey, they shit on me all the time. Don't worry about it." And it's because
yeah.
Tarantino loves movies. Period. He's
Period.
not
Yes.
trying to, you know, uh, cure cancer here. He's just trying to say, if it's an art form, it's an art form. It's
Yeah, it's an
entertaining.
art form. Yeah,
He's not trying to
absolutely.
insult anyone with, yeah, okay, some people, might feel it's racially insensitive in certain aspects, but as a whole, overall, the picture, I enjoy Transformers. Like, I'll watch it, I'll
Same,
have a good time.
same.
Sometimes I'll get
Yeah,
bored because like the action gets really like mind numbing, but it
right.
looks amazing on Blu-ray. The sound's
Yeah,
incredible. And again,
absolutely.
popcorn flick. You don't watch it to
Absolutely.
be immersed and enthralled, but like a Parasite. You don't watch it like Parasite and be like,
No,
wow,
yeah.
this is why it won Best Picture. No. And
Yeah, yeah.
Parasite is a movie that you can't take a washroom break. Or if you do, you got to
No.
pause it. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? You
Yeah.
have to always
And
be
it
immersed.
lingers. Like Parasite, there's been other movies, Get Out as well, is Requiem for a Dream,
Yeah.
Donnie Darko. Like
Yeah.
these are movies that like you watch, and as much as as much as you put yourself in the movie from a spectator standpoint, the movie walks away with you, in my
Hmm.
opinion. You know, for
Hmm.
me at any rate, like I didn't walk away from those flicks and then it was just gone out of my mind. Like,
Hmm.
and I don't mean that in a bad way, like a Michael Bay flick or like, you know, any one of those that kind of fit that
Right.
genre. You know, you watch it, you enjoy it, you move on, and like it doesn't instill into you anything. But these flicks, you know, they do, and that's great. Like there's a time for that. You know, there's
Hmm.
a period of enjoyment that is suitable for that kind of a flick. But I don't know, man. Like I feel like for me personally, obviously, I enjoy gritty flicks. That's my kind of at this point in my evolution as a storyteller, as a writer, as an actor. That's kind of where I'm at. But I doesn't mean I don't have a high amount of appreciation for the eye candies, the Michael Bays, the stunning cinematography, and you know, and I was that's why I wanted to ask you: have you
Hmm.
watched Project Power?
Yes, on
And the
Netflix.
reason,
Yeah.
yeah, on Netflix. And
Mhm.
I've read like kind of mixed reviews, and like some of these mixed reviews were really kind of harsh on it. But I hadn't watched it, so I wanted to
Mm.
watch it. And I will say, like the climactic scene at the end. No spoilers or anything for you,
For
Daniel.
sure.
I know you haven't
Yeah.
watched it, so I'm not going to ruin it for you. But
Oh
like
no,
the
I've
climactic.
watched it, but for the audience that maybe haven't watched it.
Oh, my bad, my bad. Yeah, no,
Yeah, yeah,
for
no, I've
anybody
watched it, man,
that
on
hasn't.
Netflix. Yeah.
All right, all right. But like that climactic scene at the end, right? Like
Hmm.
that might be no joke, one of the most, and that's including all of these MCU movies I've watched recently and
Hmm.
the DCEU movies, and like, you know, all of those taken into consideration, the climactic scene in Project Power might be the best visually. Now I'm talking visually, might be the
Hmm.
best minute or 2 minutes of film I've seen in a very long time. Like
Yeah.
I rewatched that particular scene at least probably 4 or 5 times during my first viewing. Like I
Right.
didn't even wait till the full. I didn't even finish watching the whole damn movie
Right. Right.
yet.
Right.
Then
Yeah.
you know, like I was in it,
Yeah.
and then it happened. I'm like,
Yeah.
no, I got to see that again. You
Yeah.
know, and
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
was just it was so visually stunning and so well done with Jamie Foxx. And you know, I don't know everybody else that played a part in it, but like that was just amazing. So like, you
Mhm.
know, there's a room for everything, and there should be an appreciation for everything as well. It is an art, and like all other art forms, like it doesn't only occupy one very narrow part of the spectrum. There's, you know, as with people, like it's so diverse. So
Yeah. I don't believe. I'm the kind of guy where I don't believe anything is really a bad movie. There's always a piece of inspiration, at least for me, that I take from it, whether it's a
yeah,
scene or a line of dialogue.
yeah.
I wouldn't completely dismiss a movie just to dismiss it. Again, there are some that are very hard to watch, but I always like, for example, like the Batman versus Superman. A lot of people shit on it, and a lot of people give it crap. And for me, again, there are problems with the story. There's moments when it's like, did you need, a big bad villain at the end? Why couldn't it just
Hmm.
be a story about two heroes, trying to resolve their different ideals? But I liked the story at its core, and I liked
Hmm.
how Zack Snyder tried his best to give his own vision toward it. He tried to ground it in reality as much as he could, as goofy as some people thought it would be. But I think he did it.
Hmm.
He was pretty successful that way. Like there's a scene that comes to mind a lot where he goes to the Capitol and it just explodes. Now,
Hmm.
I wish they would have um, kind of drawn it out a bit more, or kind of used
Hmm.
it as a way to frame Superman, or kind of make humans turn against him. But it was already resolved in the next scene. They said it was a terrorist
Hmm.
attack.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
those elements, again, this is what I mean by taking the good out of the stories, is you watch it and you think of that, and that was like that. Wow, that was a really cool brief moment. and it was
Yeah.
inspiring. You know,
Yeah.
maybe I could use this concept in something of my own writing, or it just, to completely ignore a movie entirely, it is not smart. It's not wise. I
No.
think if you're a true storyteller, a true filmmaker, you'll watch any form of content, any form of entertainment, and
Mm-hmm.
you're able to at least recognize the vision, that they're trying to portray, that they're trying to deliver
100%.
to the audience, right? And I wanted to mention something because you were mentioning about Blade Runner 2049, exceptionally well done movie, and that deserved more praise than what it got. Um, but it's just the circumstances, whatever have you. The market doesn't lie, as they say. Whatever the market
Mm-hmm.
wants, it gets. However, I enjoyed one thing I really enjoyed about the movie, and like you said, it's a very simple story.
Mm-hmm.
But this is what I mean by subverting expectations, taking it in another direction,
Mm-hmm.
where there's this whole notion on, like I was explaining before, the character that we're watching or what they're doing, we feel like they owe us something, like they
Mm-hmm.
are important to the story. They are bigger than the story, but in reality, they're, in our world, they're bigger for us. For example,
Yeah.
Harrison Ford, Han Solo in Star Wars, right? He's
Mm-hmm.
big.
Mm-hmm.
He's big for us, in our pop culture, in our universe. But in the Star Wars universe, he's not. He's just a random character. He's a smuggler. And they made a note of that in Solo, a Star Wars story. I appreciated that line when he's like, yeah, no one cares what your name is. Because in that world, to those characters, they don't care who Han Solo is. He doesn't have his own action figure line. And he doesn't
Mm-hmm.
make Harrison Ford, is not portraying him. That's a character in that universe. So what I'm trying to make a point with Blade Runner is Ryerson, Ryan Gosling,
Mm-hmm.
Ryan Gosling in that story. There
Mm-hmm.
was a moment where they were alluding to him being the product of a human and an android,
Mm-hmm.
procreating, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there was a moment
Yeah.
where he felt, this is why I'm different. And even the
Yeah.
woman that's a hologram even told him, like, I always knew you would be different. And again, it's playing
Yeah.
into our
Yeah. Yeah.
emotions as
Yeah.
humans,
It's that whole buildup.
that
Yeah. Yeah.
concept of the chosen one, the philosophy,
Yeah. Yeah.
the
Yeah.
oh, I'm special, I'm important, whatever. And again, in our universe, he should be the one to be important because he's on the front page. He's on the
Yeah.
poster. He's the
Yeah.
center
Yeah.
of the story,
He's
right?
doing the
From a
press
marketing
tours and
perspective, he's
everything.
doing the
Yeah.
press tour. Hey, he
100%.
should
Yeah,
get
man.
that. Come on, that right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then the director Denis Villeneuve, this is why he's very talented, and I love him for this. Is he flips it on its head and he's like, no, tells the audience he's not the one that's a product. It was all an illusion. It was actually the woman
Mm-hmm.
that he was investigating who was the product.
Mm-hmm.
Some random woman that he was investigating who appears for about 5-10 minutes, showing us that not all of us are special. Not all of us
Yeah.
we have a story. We have a part to play in everyone's story. We're very
Absolutely.
special in
Yeah.
that way. But in the
Yeah.
grand scheme of things, we're just like everybody else. And there's
Yeah.
nothing that special. And what I loved about that movie, I should add, is Ryan Gosling's character. He, instead of, hiding away and saying, okay, I'm not special, or I'm not deserving of being playing an important part of this story, of this investigation, he proves everybody wrong. He proves the audience wrong and saying, no, I'm still special in my own right. And he ends up
Mm-hmm.
helping Harrison Ford and he saves the day. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. He
And
pushes the story forward,
he pushes
which
the
is
story
critical.
forward, but he doesn't
Yeah.
need to be. That's not the point of the story. It's not to be like, who
Yes.
is the first product of a human and an android
Mm-hmm.
having sex, right?
Mm-hmm.
It is, the story is this android Ryan Gosling trying to figure out who he is and where he, and his part in the story was to be the hero, to be the one, to save Harrison Ford's character and
Yeah.
resolve, the conflicts of the story. So I just really admired. I have to rewatch it again. It's been a while, and as I'm talking, it's coming back to me a bit. But
Mm-hmm.
I remember taking that from that story and saying, "Wow, like that was so cool that they didn't make him be, the be all end all character, right? Because that's the story of Jesus, right? We've seen it in so
Yeah.
many. It's the most
Oh.
ripped off story of
Yeah.
all time, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Um, Harry Potter, the
Very
same
well
thing.
put. Yeah.
I do want
Yeah.
to I do
Dude.
want to
Like.
mention though with Harry Potter, by the way, I'm
Mm-hmm.
going off for a
Mm-hmm.
rant here, but I want to mention with
Yeah.
Harry
All good.
Potter is I'll give a credit to the books, to J.K. Rowling, because if you watch the movies, it's a bit annoying because he's the chosen one and everyone reveres him and loves him and adores him, really, like puts him on a pedestal. And you get that
Yeah.
vibe, kind of like Neo in the Matrix, right? He's the one that has to, save us from everyone. The philosophy's written, whatever. But the books, I took an appreciation, and I saw what she was trying to do is, yes, there was a philosophy written, and I bought into that because they're dealing with magic and they're dealing with all sorts of powers. So I believed in some
Hmm.
sort of sorcery, and if anyone's telling a prophecy, it would be that kind of genre, right? Like that
Yeah,
fantasy
yeah,
element.
sure.
However, the way they writ the way she wrote Harry Potter and how he had flaws and how he would get angry. He's
Yeah,
not depicted as he is in the movies when you read the books. My
yeah,
perception of the character was he had a lot of issues. He had a lot of trauma in
yeah,
his
yeah.
life.
He evolved a lot. Yeah,
And he evolved a lot, and he was
yeah,
telling people off. He was telling Hermione to
yeah.
shut up. He was
Hmm.
like angry. When he was angry, he was angry, and
Yeah,
he at one point didn't even tolerate bullshit. In the
yeah.
movies, he's a whimsical character, and he tries to always be the good
No, they
man.
they played certain elements of that in the movie too, which I was appreciative
Right.
of as well. But it's funny because since you brought up Harry Potter, one thing that I don't think a lot of people realize, because it was such a almost throwaway plot line, was the fact that had Voldemort, wow, this is we're really delving into deep deep material here, man. But
Yeah,
once
yeah.
Voldemort selected Harry, it made him the chosen one. But per the infrastructure that kind of led up to that, it could have easily been Neville, right? And like
Hmm.
that's something that it's funny because I don't think I don't think enough thought is given to the fact of how random that that decision to have Harry be the be all end all was. Like Voldemort had two choices: Neville on one side, Harry on the other.
Hmm.
The prophecy alluded to both of them. It could have been either or. Voldemort happened to choose Harry. Otherwise, the whole series could have easily been Neville and the
Neville
Philosopher's
story, yeah.
Stone. Yeah, Neville Longbottom. Mind you, may not have the same ring to it, but
Yeah, Neville Longbottom. Neville
it,
Longbottom in the
it
Goblet of Fire. I could see it on the shelves right now.
in
Yeah.
another, since MCU is going all into this multiverse and all that,
Oh
in
yeah.
another world, in another universe,
It's becoming meta
people.
now. It's just taking another
I feel like, what, I don't know about you, Daniel, but
yeah.
I grew up with comic books. Like that was
Hmm.
my earliest form of literary appreciation, was comic books.
Yeah.
So the ideas and the themes, and credit to like some of these comic book writers
Of
for
course.
pushing their art of storytelling to a genre, to a point where now the art form, like the cinematic industry, looks to them for stories.
Yeah.
Like how
Yeah.
crazy is that? Like,
Yeah.
but I mean, I have such an appreciation for that, and it's really kind of like, for all of the moaning, and deservedly so in some ways, but for all of the moaning of like all these IP franchises and all of that, like there's a reason, man. Like it's not like people are going to that well because there's nothing coming out of it. Like there's freaking gold coming out of it,
Yeah.
so it's
They're
and
making it work. They're making it work,
they're,
and that's what I
yeah,
that's what I've noticed is they're trying their
100%.
best, and not every story is going to sell. I'm appreciating, for example, WandaVision a little more
Yeah, me
because
too. Yeah,
they're
yeah,
being creative about it. Like they're
yeah.
not just throwing it out of the hat and say, "Oh, what happened to Wanda after what?" They're saying, "What would happen?" Um,
To a
because
character that's
to a character
experienced.
that
Yeah,
exactly to experiencing that trauma of losing someone
yeah,
they loved, right? And they really
yeah,
dive into it, and they do it in a creative way, and it starts to make sense why they do the
yeah,
sitcoms. Friends were texting me
yeah,
like, I don't get this,
yeah,
and I said
yeah.
it's gonna
Same.
make sense. I enjoyed
Yeah,
it because
yeah.
it was a throwback,
Same.
and it was,
Yeah.
again, I was charming. I love all media, but it
I
has to
love
make
those
sense.
homages, man.
Yeah, exactly, but
I'm
it
a
has to
fan of
make,
those.
but the audience, right, has a right to question it because, again, back
Of
to as
course.
storytellers, as writers, we, as much as we like to throw tributes, homages, whatever, we have to make sure it's cohesive.
Agreed.
And they're starting to now, unravel and make it I don't want to spoil last episode I watched, but I said, okay, that's the kicker, that's the one, that's now I can see why it
Hmm.
plays into a part in the story. So
I
yeah,
mean,
it's very important.
with WandaVision, in the lead up to it, because it was the MCU's first foray into kind of television and kind of series format, although you could argue that everything they've done throughout the other phases was all a form of
Right.
kind of a limited release kind of story, although in a much larger scale. nonetheless, there was certainly from my standpoint, I was a little bit curious to see if this was just going to be a let's throw the full weight of the MCU marketing machine behind this and a whole bunch of millions of dollars, and whatever comes out comes out. And they didn't take that route, and they should be applauded for that, you know? So
Well, I often joke around with one of my friends about the Marvel, like the MCU, the direction, because as much as I love the movies, I'm also afraid it's going to get to a point where it's overdone and
sure.
there's nowhere where else to go. And it is
It's a
possible.
legit concern. Yeah.
It's a legit concern. You know, all
Yeah.
genres die, right? And then they come
Yeah.
back, and then they die,
Yeah.
and then they come back, right?
100%. Yeah, no, totally.
So it's just like Westerns, right? Westerns used to be the shit. Like everybody watched Westerns back in the day.
Yeah.
Now
Yeah.
Westerns, you can never, I haven't seen, the last one I've seen probably was Django Unchained, right? And
Yeah.
that was Tarantino's eyes a Seltzer.
Yeah. It
So
requires a certain
yeah,
special kind of talent to
it
run with a
does.
Western idea now. And yeah,
But who's to say
Tarantino
in 10
uniquely,
years?
yeah,
Yeah. But
100%.
who's to
Yeah.
say in 10 years, right? It comes back and then there's a whole market for it in like for 30 years span and then it stops again, right? I believe every genre has their moment, and
Yeah.
superheroes right now we're experiencing the Renaissance, as they say. We're experiencing a time when it's at its peak. Um, a lot of stories, like you said, are inspired by comic books, and the market's there. You know, video
Yeah.
games are you
Yeah.
know Miles. They made a Miles Morales video game for Spider-Man for the
Yeah.
PS5 launch. Like that's huge. That's huge,
Absolutely. Yeah.
and it's just going to go keep going and keep going until they run out of ideas. One of the things that I'm kind of on the fence about is this show I see looming called What If, and that's basically what if certain events in the Marvel universe never happen. And I was joking around with a friend on one of the podcasts saying, isn't that just a cheap way to tell another story and make money? Right, like an alternative version. It's like us
Yeah.
writing an alternative version of crack. Like, what if he
Yeah.
never had
Yeah.
mental illness?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like, how would his life be? But
But see,
again,
I kind of sorry. I don't
yeah,
want to
no,
cut
no,
you
go
off because
ahead.
I'm curious to see where you're gonna where
I was
that
just gonna
thought's
say,
leading
like,
you.
we can't judge though, right? As much as
No.
I'm poking fun, I'm being a bit of a shit. We can't judge unless we see it for ourselves, and I'm a huge firm believer on that. So I'm not gonna judge it further until I watch it, right? Like
Yeah.
that series.
I mean, I agree with you, and I think that most people now have kind of adopted a certain level of patience towards these big budget films because again they've seen that filmmakers even in that genre are willing and able to execute well thought
Hmm.
out stories within it. But the What If series for me is quite intriguing because of the familiarity people have with so many of these storylines and
Hmm.
so many of these characters. The story of Spider-Man and Captain America and all these well known established characters in pop culture. Really, they're
The
not even just
icons,
like comic.
icons,
Yeah,
yeah.
they're icons. They're giants. Um, but like now to kind of force people to reconcile what they thought they knew with this brand new, potentially inversed uh, interpretation of them, I think comes with a lot of possibilities. So I'm cautiously optimistic. Let's just say that. I
Right.
feel like if they go if they really kind of push the envelope and there's been nothing to kind of make me think that they're not, I think that it's going to be a really interesting take.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's my biggest concern is because as you were speaking, I'm just thinking, even as much as I'm enjoying WandaVision, I can't help but think, instead of it being always the villain of the month or the day or whatever have you, what's the stake? Like, what's the big looming threat? The
Yeah.
MCU, the reason why I give it credit is, yes, it was going on for like 22 films, but
Mhm.
everyone knew that it was going to end somehow with this Thanos threat that was first introduced in the Avengers. And we didn't know
Mhm.
much about him. We didn't know, or at least I didn't, but someone like yourself
Mhm.
who's in comic books, right? You knew probably his backstory and where it was going to lead. But for someone like me that was just watching it from an average audience perspective, I uh, I didn't really know what to make of it, but I was excited. I was intrigued. I was saying to myself, how could it end? I remember watching Infinity War. See, Endgame, as much as I enjoyed it, Infinity
Mhm.
War was like edge of the seat because I
Yeah.
really didn't know how far they were going to take it, and I didn't know,
Yeah.
like when Tony Stark gets stabbed
Yeah.
by Thanos with his own blade. I was like, oh, that's it, because I knew. Again, this is what kind of sucks, but it's where reality kind of
I know where you're going with it.
You know what I
Yeah,
mean? It
yeah,
kind of
yeah,
comes
yeah.
in where it's like, Robert Downey Jr. in real life, he's a
Contracts
person,
and yeah,
contracts, and right.
yeah,
We know this
yeah,
as filmmakers
yeah,
too. It's just
yeah.
legalities. It's the way it is.
Sure.
I'm saying to
Yeah.
myself, is he really gonna be in the phase 4? Probably not. So he's gonna
Mm-hmm.
die in either this movie or the next movie. That's why I didn't
Mm-hmm.
get choked up when he did die in Endgame. I was probably one of the
Mm-hmm.
few people that I was like nodding my head, like, okay, that was a good way
Yeah.
that they sent them off. Because I'm saying you're gonna have to kill him. How are you gonna do it? That was the
Yeah.
biggest concern for me. Everyone else
Yeah.
was like, my buddy was like texting me gifs and I was just like, I don't know, like it was emotional, but it needed to be done. You know
Yeah, it
what I
needed
mean?
to be
Like that
done.
was the send
Absolutely.
off for the character. And
And not just the send off, man.
yeah,
It was from a story, from a character arc standpoint. And this is, I'm sure, been
exactly.
analyzed to death
Hmm.
now at this point because of how well versed the audiences are now. But from a character arc standpoint, that was the not just the logical conclusion of his character arc in the way that it was going, but it was also the most rewarding for
Hmm.
if you considered yourself a Tony Stark or an Iron Man fan within the MCU, then what better ending after being called selfish, not a team player, blah blah blah,
Exactly.
and
Exactly.
for him to do that, like that's about as good as it gets, right? And like I agree with you though on one point, and I'm glad you said it. I don't think a lot of people would agree with you, even though if they thought about it for a minute, they probably would.
Hmm.
Infinity War was the more dynamic movie. For me, I enjoyed Endgame more because of my comic book
Hmm.
background and everything. I enjoyed Endgame more because of the fan service, right? Like
Right.
the the Avengers assemble scene. Like it never till now fails to give me like goosebumps and shit. So I
Yeah.
think that
Like
that
that
for me
scene,
was,
the ending
yeah,
scene.
oh, that's epic. That's gonna go down in cinematic history. But
Avenger.
yeah, yeah, but like
Yeah. Yeah.
I agree with you. I agree with you 100%, Daniel. Infinity War was definitely the wilder ride of the two.
I think
Definitely
that's,
more
yeah.
suspenseful.
I want to just mention something. I think this is why we gravitate to each other and why especially yourself, because you've come to me with the notion of you're very into dark and gritty storytelling. I don't know if anyone picked it up yet, but I'm a very crazy guy in the sense that I'm the kind of guy where I would kill off Tony Stark in Infinity War,
Same.
throw off the audience, and like
Hmm.
that stab, because what it
Hmm.
is that it puts the characters in a situation of how do we avenge this person that died for
Yeah,
us, you know what I mean, that
yeah.
that fought to the end. And it also is a feeling of despair for the audience,
Hmm.
like uncertainty. If I could put the
Hmm.
audience in a believable place of uncertainty, there's
Hmm.
something so
There's an
satisfying.
accomplishment.
There's an
100%.
accomplishment. And then when you can reward them in a different way. Now, it's not the ending that maybe it's not the way they want it to happen, but guess what?
Hmm.
That's reality. And that's why I
Yeah.
wanted to make a point that I forgot. You were talking about how, people want this thing about interpretation. They want everything to be open to interpretation because they feel like that's a good story, but yet they want everything to be wrapped up in a nice bow.
Yeah.
My whole thing is, unless you're jumping the shark, why is it that people yell at the screen and say, "Oh my God, why did that happen? Why didn't he just like hit him? Why didn't he?" Reality happens, life
Hmm.
happens. People don't
Hmm.
do things that make sense. Why did
Hmm.
you lose a job after dedicating 25 years of your life at a company?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
things just happen. And what I'm trying to get at is sometimes when we watch movies, I think the best movies are the ones where we can acknowledge and say, you know what, maybe that just happened. Obviously, we have to justify it in our writing. We can't just throw things out there and expect the audience to buy it.
Hmm.
But sometimes things, like you said with Prometheus, I believe from a filmmaker standpoint, maybe they're just leaving it open ended, and maybe allowing the audience to ask so many questions because that is religion. That
Hmm.
is how we look at our
Absolutely.
our faith system. There are
Yeah.
people constantly. The Bible exists, but yet there are people that are still questioning death. Why are they
Yeah.
questioning where you go if it's written in the Bible? Because life is about interpretation. That's the human experience. That is the human condition. We
Hmm.
are meant to always ask questions, to always never be satisfied. It's what drove us forward. It's what drove us to this place in existence. And I think it's something to say where, you have a film like that where, again, I have to rewatch it. I'm sure it has its problems, but from the way you're describing it, you know what? It makes sense because I know it was predicated on the idea of religion and where we come from, right?
Yeah,
If I'm
yeah,
correct. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely.
Prometheus. So that is a very touchy subject. And the filmmakers aren't going to give you all the right answers in that film. They're just going to
Because
try
they're,
to tell
yeah,
you, their interpretation of,
yeah,
what is real. Scholars
yeah,
have been trying to do it for centuries.
yeah. If the likes of Aristotle and Plato and Rumi haven't figured out life, then guys, I think we're being a bit hard on Ridley Scott for not being able to give us
Yeah.
the answers. You know what I mean? And yeah, 100%, man. Like it's look, it's at the end of the day, or not, I shouldn't say at the end of the day because that's in of itself too definitive, but
Mhm.
there's got to be an appreciation for asking the question. It's not always about getting, like, somebody's got to bring forth the question for perhaps somebody else to bring forth the answer, and the gutsy filmmakers, the gutsy storytellers, the gutsy innovators are always the ones that have to start with the questions that nobody else was
Daring
either
to ask.
thinking of or
Mhm.
or with the necessary intestinal fortitude to be able to bring those questions forward to the light of the masses. Because being picked apart like that, like 100% Ridley Scott knew that that was going to be analyzed and questioned. 100% the guys who did that Sopranos final episode knew that
Yeah.
that was going to be analyzed and questioned,
Yeah.
but like it's got it. um One of the best, if not the best show, yes, I will say this, Daniel, I will go on the
Yeah.
record and say the best show I've ever watched was The Wire, right? I don't think I'm saying anything
I have
too
to watch. I have to watch that one, but I've heard a lot of great
oh,
things for
100%,
sure.
man.
Yeah.
I'm happy to kind of rewatch that
It was
with you
Breaking
even.
Bad before Breaking Bad.
Bro, like there's so many elements that's brought forward in The Wire, but like when you look at it, because it was made during obviously a different period in
Of
history,
course.
right,
Of
compared
course.
to now.
Yeah.
But when you look back on it and you watch it, like I wonder. First of all, it was not a huge success right out of the gate.
Mm.
It was not necessarily immediately recognized as this um, new yardstick at all.
Hmm.
But in retrospect, when you watch it with the, I don't know if you watch it without the understanding that it's one of the best shows, because I already knew that it was heavily recommended to me,
Right.
almost to the point of like threatening, like motherfucker, you need to go
Yeah.
watch
Yeah.
this
If you
show
don't
type
watch
of
this,
thing.
I'm gonna.
Yeah, like we ain't friends anymore,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
So like I did watch it knowing that people had such high opinions of it, but when you watch it, and unless you've got that already understanding, it's a fair question to ask while you're watching it, especially in the earlier episodes, like why is this so good, but
Right.
then you start to realize like the contributions that each character makes that contributes to this rich, vibrant tapestry, even though it's all kind of packaged as shit. Like it's all about like
For
the
sure.
human condition and how bleak it is, and kind of how much of a failed experiment almost like the city of Baltimore in all of its various institutions are. That's how it's portrayed, right? But
It's a
in
social
order,
commentary. I just wanted to add, it was a
100%, yeah,
social commentary on the war on drugs. No.
it was a social commentary a city's a city's failing war on drugs.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
the big part about it was David Simon. I hope I'm saying the name or I've got the right name,
Oh, the crazy.
especially
Yeah.
especially
I can
with
confirm
me
that.
ranting about how much I love it. But
For sure. For sure.
but
Let
like
me
David
see.
Simon was
Yeah.
big on like kind of articulating that,
Yeah.
like guys, we're not winning this war, and like and there's real grassroots lives that are kind of involved in this, and this is the kind of toll it's taking. And he's good at, one of the good things about it is there's no kind of nobody's hot, the audience isn't on their high, they're not on a proverbial high horse while they're watching it. As an
Right.
audience, you're brought down into the trenches, into the gutter with these characters, and it allows you to kind of empathize with them. And honestly, Daniel, like a huge part of my appreciation for storytelling in a gritty form through a gritty lens comes from stuff like that. Like it's when you can make something beautiful come from that, like Tupac said, right? Like a rose that grew out of concrete. If you can do that, then you've elevated your craft. Your ability to do your craft has clearly been elevated to a point where you've accomplished something. Because yeah, man, like if you can do that successfully, and there's been, you know what's interesting? I'm going to ask you a question.
Sure.
What do you, if you had to name like who the two biggest icons of like the superhero world, who would you say they are?
Like based on my experience as like a
Sure.
viewer.
Yeah, or even what you think is pop culture's understanding
Two
of things.
biggest that always pop up. I would probably say Spider-Man and Batman.
Dude, you took
Yeah.
the perfect
Oh,
one. Yeah,
okay,
man.
good.
No, absolutely, exactly.
I'm
See,
not even gonna
man,
say
that's why
yeah,
we're vibing,
exactly.
man.
We're compatible.
No, absolutely, because like it, both of them portray the world at a very street level, in a very kind of, you know, Spider-Man, for compared to like the rest of the MCU, is gritty. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like he's not up in the stars in Asgard. He's not, you know, he's not fighting aliens with the Guardians of the Galaxy and stuff like that. He's fighting a dude with like 8 mechanical arms and like a guy dressed in a bird costume, you know, and like
Yeah.
that's what's resonated with people. You know, Batman was like the most kind of darkest, grittiest of all of the superheroes, really,
Well,
and
he
yet
fought with
he's
his
been,
bare hands. Like he
yeah,
beat the
man,
shit out, and
yeah,
he trained like
yeah,
Christopher Nolan. The way he dove into the character, that's why he's right. You praise him.
yeah, yeah,
He that was his goal as a filmmaker.
yeah,
He's like, I have to tell a story of Batman, because when he would read the comics, it's kind of like how we interpret it is Batman's not these flashy superheroes. This guy's like
yeah,
beating people to a pulp. Now
yeah,
that could be grounded in reality. How could we best, make it believable to the audience? And it shows you, right? Batman Begins. He goes through training. He buys the
yeah,
military gear. He basically
yeah.
uses his money to get to that point, so it would make sense.
Excuse
He's
me.
a billionaire. Yeah,
Hmm.
no worries.
Hmm.
But Spider-Man, right? The reason why I mentioned Spider-Man is because yes, he's although he's in a flashy suit and he's battling, these guys that, like I said, have feathers like the Vulture, or just weird, contraptions like Doc Ock. I think why they keep remaking it and why they just can't give it up, or why Sony does not give Disney the full rights, is because there's
Hmm.
something compelling about a character where he's a superhero, but he's
Hmm.
so vulnerable and
Yes,
he's so humble that he doesn't
yes.
even see himself as a superhero. If you watch the movies, any
Hmm.
iteration, they
Hmm.
never have a moment where he's cocky about being Spider-Man. He's cocky
Yes.
about his
The
confidence
times he
that,
is, though, the times he
yes,
is, it always comes back to like
it haunts him.
seriously
Yes,
bite him.
yes.
Yeah, no,
I shouldn't
yeah.
say that. There are times that those are the moments that define him. Those are the defining moments,
Hmm.
like with the Uncle
Hmm.
Ben scene. That's a perfect
Yes,
example, right?
yeah.
Where it's starting to get to him, right? And that's the whole
Hmm.
speech about great power comes great responsibility.
Hmm.
However, as a character overall, it never he never acknowledges or embraces the idea that he's on the same level as Iron Man, and when they do, I should say in Spider-Man Homecoming, for instance, I like that, Iron Man has a moment with him and he says, if you're nothing without the suit, then you shouldn't have it.
You don't, yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
that's to any superhero, really, is, or any human being, right?
yeah.
People that flash around, oh, I got like 1,000 followers, 50,000 followers on my verified account, because those are our superpowers in real life. Or I got a lot of money, or I got a lot of attention here. It's like, yeah, but without those things, what are you? Are you a good person? Do you have good intentions? Do you have values? Are
Hmm.
you intelligent?
Hmm.
um, if you don't have those things, then you're nothing without them,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. No,
They're
absolutely
just
true.
flashy items that you dangle in front of people's faces to convince you that you're a better person, right? And
Yeah.
that's why I love that line, and I send it to my buddies that are into Marvel, especially one of them. He loves that line too, because we both idolize those characters, Spider-Man and Iron Man. And when they
Hmm.
had that exchange, when they had that moment, he was basically telling him to grow up and say, if you go around with this suit thinking you're the best, you're not, because if you
Yeah,
can't handle it, right?
yeah.
So when he takes that away from him, that's his moment, as that's his defining moment. So again, when, like you said, when he does take it too far and he says, I'm fine being Spider-Man, and I don't need to tolerate anything else, that's when it slaps him in the face,
He's
as it
humbled
should.
hard.
That's
Yeah,
humbled
yeah,
heart, and that's
yeah,
reality. That's reality
yeah.
where anytime we get too carried away, you can never be overconfident, right? You can never
Hmm.
be overconfident, especially when we're writing or when we're doing directing. That's why you always hear me, especially when I'm on set. I make a decision, but at the same time, I also am curious. If I'm not really sure about something, I'll ask, yourself or people we work with, how should I set up this shot, or what do you guys feel? Because you can never not have inspiration. There's inspiration from anyone, anything. Everybody's creative. There's a reason why they're there.
Yeah,
Especially
and
if you're dealing with the people that are creating the story with you.
I mean, for me, it's so I started, as you said, I'm a practitioner of the writing arts first. However, I early on I gained I wanted to understand better the role of the actor, and kind of what, not just what their purposes or their role in terms of making the film, or the
Right.
value that they provide, but I also wanted to understand the challenges and the experience from their standpoint. Which is why I got into acting, was because initially it was just about understanding what their experience would be, so then I could empower them better when I'm doing what I do. But to your point, like, once I did that, you understand that with the amount of, I can't really think of a better word, so I'm going to say leverage. I'm going to
Mhm.
say the amount of leverage that they can have upon a final product of the film, that is the film. You appreciate then all of contributions that come from every single participant in a film, or a TV show, or even a commercial. Daniel, like
Yeah.
I've written commercials, and
Nice.
I've yeah, and I was lucky enough to be cast in one of the commercials in a very small role, right?
Oh wow. Yeah.
But it was a really interesting experience, because the guys, the team that was involved in producing, directing, filming, there was no thought amongst them that, oh, we're just filming a commercial, like we're of some lower art form or anything. And good, because the energy they brought was just as significant. The amount of creativity that goes into it was just as daunting, and it paid off just as much when people really kind of pushed the envelope of that. So, like, it's crazy that it's it's crazy, and it's a beautiful thing about how much of a symbiotic process making a finished film, TV show, or commercial can be, because you really do need everybody kind of firing on all cylinders to come away with something great. And you need everyone to be respectful of everyone else's, not just contributions, but of the space they need to make those contributions. One of the things that I loved with working with you on set was that,
Hmm.
as not just as a writer, but because I was acting in that project as well,
Of course.
there was a lot of room to do, to kind of, improvise in if we felt that the dialogue upon our first take just didn't pop enough,
Of
well,
course.
okay, so let's go back and write that. And I'd like to think that, even though that myself and Kosa, we wrote it, like I'd like to think, allowed for contributions from everybody,
Hmm.
with the actors, with you as a director, to kind of make your suggestions, and their suggestions for what they felt would have been more authentic, more organic. And for me, from an acting standpoint, I appreciated the freedom to be able to articulate what I thought, because as a writer, as somebody who's part of the conceptualization process,
Hmm.
you can be easily removed away from the the challenge and the reward that an actor can attain by contributing their own interpretation, because they have, in a lot of ways, you know what I mean, like, when if you not the best analogy, Daniel,
Hmm.
so pardon me on this, but if
Sure.
you liken the making of a movie to a war, right? Like, a general can give orders and can direct and say, what, we need to shore up the eastern flank, and
Hmm.
so on and so forth, but there's no way he can properly understand what somebody who's on the very in the trenches, in no man's land, actually seeing across from him the enemy or the challenge, if we want to take it casually back into acting verse, the challenge of like articulating what he feels this character would do. I mean, that's not to say it's always true or right, being in
Right.
air quotes, but
Hmm.
there's definitely going to be insights that can be provided from somebody in the headspace of that role, that somebody who's sitting back and has got this grand view can't get too granular sometimes into that demands and everything. So it's
Yeah,
it's
it's the actors are just as creative, and that's kind
absolutely,
of that's why
and they
I
need to be.
approach, yeah, and that's why I approached the project the way I did. Is I looked at the directors that I look up to and inspired by, and I'm thank you for mentioning that point, because the reason why you heard me a lot dealing with the actors, like yourself, saying, we're going to do this take. I want you to just say the lines how you interpret them. And then I'll come
Mhm.
in and I'll like give you my interpretation of how I see it. And maybe we can go from there, almost like in a
Yeah,
negotiation at one point.
yeah.
And several directors have said that, where that's their style. I know Scorsese, that's his style. That's how he filmed The Wolf of Wall Street, particularly. It
Hmm.
was a lot of improv. That's why it was so funny. It was improvisation. It was,
Dude, can you
ad lib.
imagine that flick without Matthew McConaughey doing that now
No,
iconic, right? Like that,
but that's what
but
I
that
mean
was,
by the director
yeah,
being smart enough, right?
yeah,
The talented
yeah,
enough and
yeah.
trusting, right? Because you have to also have the confidence to do that, and confidence in your actors. But I think it all pertains back to, because you were going on about, you know, to telling me that I was, you notice how everyone was professional and everyone kind of did their role, and you enjoy the fact that I was respecting the actor's role as well and your interpretation of the script. It all goes back to the reason why you had that experience. You have to respect the story. Anytime you
Hmm.
bring on someone that's doing a project, they have to respect the story at its core. If you're not going to
Yeah,
respect the story, if you're just doing it for the paycheck, or if you're just doing it simply because you need a demo reel, you're
yeah,
never going to get your optimal performance or your
absolutely.
optimal contribution to the project. So
Hmm.
coming onto this project with you and Kosa, the reason why I kept reiterating with you guys, I've dealt with this issue, I've dealt with this subject matter, I'm going through it myself. This is what I'm learning from it. It's because I respected the content, the subject matter. I respected
Hmm.
what you guys were trying to deliver to the audience. And if I was coming in saying, "Oh, like poor bastard, like he has some depressive tendencies, like, he should just like work out, or he should just take a pill for that," then I would never respect the story. I could be as
Yeah,
flashy and stylistic as I can. I could still come on and say, "Hey guys, I can interpret it this way," but you're
yeah.
never
Check
gonna
out
get
this
enough.
camera angle and check out this lens that I'm going to use. Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah, yeah.
But even if I were to pull the whole, because I try to be a con artist, maybe I'm like saying, "Danny, why don't you interpret it this way instead of that way?"
Hmm.
It would never be authentic, in the sense that a great film director from Los Angeles, I did a podcast with him, and he was explaining what we, as filmmakers, we all agree. Just like numbers don't lie, the camera doesn't
Hmm.
lie. The camera,
Hmm.
the audience sees everything. The audience sees, if you're trying to pull a fast one, if you don't know your lines, if you don't believe in what you're conveying to the audience, whether it's from a cinemata- cinematographer, cinematic point of view. I was trying to be all fancy with my wording.
Yeah, yeah. No, I was
They
gonna
will
let you
pick
die
it.
on
Yeah,
that
right. Just let me fall on that.
one.
It's okay. I'll be the better man and tell you that you were right about the Wire creator, David Simon.
Nice, right on.
Yeah, yeah, you
Dude,
killed it. You
that would
killed
have been brutal if
it.
I wasn't. It's my
David, hope you're
favorite movie
listening.
of all. It's
Yeah,
my favorite
yeah.
show of all time. I love it. I know everyone.
What's that
No,
guy, that Bob Tarantino? He did Pulp Fiction. Bob, what's his name? Yeah,
so,
that's
something
not pretty.
tortellini. What was that?
The best is on
Oh
the Joe
man.
Rogan podcast when they're like, I love when he has Joey Diaz, because he's the only one that says, it's so true. As celebrities, you always call them by their first and last name, right?
Yeah.
Like Quentin Tarantino, but Joey Diaz, he's always like, Joe Rogan, that's not how it is. Joe Rogan, you should do it like this. And someone in the comments was like, I think someone should tell Joey that it's his first name is Joe, not Joe Rogan. Right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
when you think about it, when you're talking to someone, right, from a person to person standpoint, it's like, why would you call them? It's like me calling you the whole time, like, listen, Dani Mariathas, like, you need to understand.
Hmm.
No,
Hmm.
your name's Danny. Anyway, side point. But before we
No,
wrap this up,
no,
because
fair point. Hmm.
we were talking about a lot of Marvel and DC comic books and authenticity to characters and cinema as a whole. I wanted to ask you for this for a while, actually. Scorsese once made a comment about Marvel movies not being cinema. What's
Mm.
your impression on that?
I couldn't disagree more. I You know what, the superhero movies at one point in time, sure, I can agree they were very kind of formulaic, and the payoff for anybody watching them was always generally going to be the same. I ever since Batman Begins, ever since Iron Man, there's been so many layers added on to, not all of them, obviously, you know what I
Mhm.
mean? Some of them are just plain goofy fun with very little else going
Captain
on.
Marvel.
Ant-Man, yeah, Captain
Captain
Marvel even.
Marvel.
Although you could, you know what? No, okay. I'm gonna, unpopular opinion alert, Daniel.
Okay. Okay.
I'm gonna say that Captain Marvel gets a lot of flack unfairly, and here's why.
Okay.
All of the characters previously had some form of cachet. You know, they had clout,
Mm.
right? They were well-known characters for the most part. The ones that weren't, like the Guardians of the Galaxy and stuff, had stellar synergy and cinematography, great casting, and also an ensemble cast, right? So like that cannot be understated. Like Guardians of the Galaxy would not be what it was if it was just Chris Pratt playing Star Lord in a vacuum of like no name
100%.
characters,
Yeah.
you know. um Captain Marvel had a very daunting task, much like Doctor Strange, which is also kind of similarly pegged into the same kind of niche market in terms of its appeal, in the sense that like they weren't well-known characters, even amongst the comic book casual to hardcore fans. Like there weren't a whole lot of, I didn't buy a whole lot of Captain Marvel comic books. I didn't buy a whole lot of Doctor Strange comic books. They were just not the guys for me, or the characters that, you know, I was an X-Men, Spider-Man, Superman, Batman, like the old guard, if you will. And not to say Captain Marvel wasn't. I mean, she was well established and so on and so on. But the task that was ahead of Brie Larson, coming in as a relatively, I mean, she'd done work, you know what I mean? She'd been
Mhm.
out there, she'd put projects together. I personally didn't know her outside of her cameo in Community, and that was pretty much it.
Oh,
And
really?
like,
You didn't watch Room or
no,
anything, or 21
no,
Jump
no.
Street? No, no.
Was she in 21 Jump Street?
Yeah, she was the love interest for Jonah Hill. The
What?
high school,
Okay,
yeah, the high school girl. That was her
that's
first. I think that was her breakthrough. That what you would consider a breakthrough. I don't know if it was her
no
first role, but I
kidding.
know it was a breakthrough. Yeah.
I mean, but that movie was, she was that, it was overshadowed by, you know, the other people that were
No,
in
for
that
sure.
movie, because
Yeah,
I
there was
can't
definitely
even,
better
I
act. Yeah,
yeah, I didn't
yeah.
even remember that or recognize that she was in that flick. But anyways, I mean, it was the most well-known character in Captain Marvel was Nick Fury. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Outside of that, like everybody else was a new introduction and addition. And there's something, for what it had to overcome, as well as just the sheer amount of idiotic haters that was ready and willing to just shit on the movie before it even came out and before they watched it, was, you know, it was always not going to be an Iron Man or a Captain America or a Thor. You know, it wasn't. And plus the fact that she's a female lead, like any movie with a female lead is always going to face challenges, unfortunately. And like, you know, for with all with that amongst all the other challenges, like Captain Marvel, in my opinion, was a success. I enjoyed it. I've watched
Hmm.
it twice, three times, maybe even.
Hmm.
You know, the climactic scene where she understands that the powers that had, no, sorry, drop those air quotes, the powers that had been given to her were actually holding her back. And I
Yeah.
thought that was a really clever kind of way to kind of, because she's such an over OP character that like it was going to be challenging as well to kind of humanize her in a way that she wasn't just going to be running rampant throughout the flick beating up everybody. And that was a very clever way of them doing that, you know, and for that alone they should have gotten props. And then for the story, and then for the overall kind of theme of overcoming and believing in yourself, sure, they're well known, well trodden tropes, but it
Hmm.
was still executed very well. um I felt like Doctor Strange was in a similar, like, sure, Benedict Cumberbatch was a more well-known entity or commodity to be able to start that movie off with already. But it was still kind of it didn't get like the same acclaim that all of the other MCU flicks got, because of the same reason. Like, not too many people knew Doctor Strange, and like there wasn't as fanatic of a audience ready to kind of embrace it already. Like, people had to kind of be lured. It was more traditional. Those were more traditional movies in a lot of ways because of that. There wasn't, sure, the Marvel machine was there to promote and etc., but like in terms of taking a story and putting it on the screen, they had to deal with a more kind of conventional challenge of doing it. And I thought both were really good considering that.
Thank you for that, because you actually opened my mind to the movie. I watched it only once, and I think I'm a firm believer if you watch it over and over again, it could do a disservice, because you could not appreciate it as much, or you can appreciate it even better. So I do want to check it out more after that interpretation. And thank you for providing credibility to my comment about there's no such thing as a bad movie, because you see how what I'm telling the audience is Dani watched that movie, and as much as I hear a lot of people shit on it, someone like Dani will say, no, but I enjoyed how they humanized a character that was extremely overpowered, extremely a force to be reckoned with. And instead of her making it Thanos's kryptonite, if you will, I know that's not probably the best word to use.
No, it's accurate.
It's right. It's accurate, but you basically, made me see the character from another perspective. So I like that interpretation, and that's something that I enjoyed. I think it was just a lot of movies like that. This is what I mean. They're trying. They have a good story at their core. There's just a lot of external factors, a lot of meta that's overshadowing it. So you got the whole feminism movement. On top of that, you got this marketing behind the climactic battle of the MCU, right? Because it just came before the end game. So I think a lot of people were just like, show me end game. I don't care about Captain Marvel spinoff. I don't feel people were like focused enough or concentrated analyzing the story, maybe.
Yeah, but you know what? It's I want to be really careful here, because of obviously where we are in a culture right now. This might be a little too controversial. But why is it then that the same critiques were not levied at Black Panther? You know, like we're talking about two different groups that have been similarly. No, I'm going to stop there. Two different groups that were that had to earn their place within the MCU and within kind of cinema, definitely within cinema. And Black Panther came in and was a force to be reckoned with from the get-go. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Sure, absolutely. Michael B. Jordan's take on Killmonger and just the character as it was created, conceptualized, and executed was a force of nature. It was incredible. To me, Killmonger overshadowed Black Panther in that movie. I have no qualms about saying that.
Yeah, same here.
Yeah, like he was for me the most dynamic and awe-inspiring. The one that captured my attention the most was Killmonger.
Well, he felt like the most human character, and I loved his motives. 100%. His motives were very complex. And again, back to our whole concept about characters being three-dimensional. It wasn't so easy to root for him, and it wasn't so easy to be against him, right?
Yeah,
because he had a pretty strong motive, and I enjoyed that motive. You know how he wanted to basically redeem all the suffering that Black people went through, and him saying, we have this technological mecca, and we're not even helping our people. I've lived through that experience, right?
Absolutely. And I'm so glad you said that, because he lived through that experience, it lended an authenticity to his character and his actions, where you couldn't just brush him aside as like a token bad guy in the MCU. You know what I mean? And I don't, I'm going off track a bit, but I feel like the same challenges that Black Panther overcame very successfully, I might add, I don't feel like we in a society are ready to adorn to a movie like Captain Marvel, because on the surface of it, it should have been celebrated irrespective, almost irrespective
Right.
of whether or not it was a great flick. It should have been celebrated for the fact of what it accomplished. A female lead superhero in the 1990s where it was set,
Yeah, the
it was
setting, yeah.
they made a lot of they made choices, whether or not they're good choices, bad choices, daring choices can be interpreted. There's the people that kind of immediately want to shit on Captain Marvel, I feel, are not properly taking all of these factors into consideration. And if they were to kind of look at it through that lens, I think they would probably have to be at least acknowledging that on some level it was a success before anyone even watched it. It was a success. It just was, in
Yeah,
my opinion.
for sure. No, it's definitely something that can't be ignored. And it's something that I'm now curious to watch. I got my Disney Plus subscription, so
Word, yeah, me
I'll
too.
check it out when I get, yeah, right. Now they got
Yeah.
Stars or Star
Yo,
or whatever.
Stars is dope. Yeah,
Yeah, they got
have you checked out their
Aliens.
catalog, man?
No,
Yo, it's
I
crazy.
briefly checked it out, but I'm just like really happy that they
Yeah,
needed
man.
to, right? From a
They did.
competitive, are you kidding? Like I was watching
You know what?
Netflix
Actually,
and
no.
what's up?
I'm gonna disagree with you on that. I don't think they needed to because
Okay.
they're Disney. I don't think they needed
They needed
to.
anything.
But
They
I
don't really
love
need
the fact.
anything. Yeah.
No, they don't, bro. But like the fact that they were fine, the fact that they did it makes me so psyched because now everybody else is gonna have to step up their game. Like Netflix,
Yeah.
I think is still the unacknowledged. It's still like the clear winner of the streaming wars at this
Yeah.
point in time. I don't
They're
think
still pumping
like
out
it just
they're still pumping out original content as much as people,
yeah.
say, oh, like they're running out of content or people might
No.
not enjoy it. I still enjoy their content, like their
Yeah.
documentaries, limited
Yeah.
series.
Yeah.
Again, that the amend
Bro,
that
Narcos?
Narcos, are you
What?
kidding me?
Like, come on,
But the
man.
fact
Like,
that they're keeping up with it and
yeah,
it's a certain
man.
style, a certain quality of work
Yeah.
that they put
Yeah.
out. Again, Disney,
Yeah.
yeah, you have your whole Disney lineup. I mean,
Yeah.
superhero lineup. But I want to see other things. I want to see
Yeah.
you expand into other areas, other territories. I really enjoyed this conversation, Danny, and I plan to have more of
Yeah,
these with you in the
likewise.
future. It's always fun talking about the writer's journey, talking about how
Hmm.
we stay creative, stay inspired, and where that you know inspiration comes from. So, well, until then, we'll talk soon. Anything you have to say to the audience?
No, go watch Cracked and look out for my dude Daniel. He's a super exciting, super dynamic talent, and I think the industry is gonna have to reckon with that
Thank you.
sooner rather than later. No, for real, man. I'm super psyched to see what you got coming out. I know you
Thank
and I
you.
have a project we're working on, but just like stylistically and just like your body of work so far speaks volumes for where you're heading, and I'm super excited to work with you and looking forward to what you're coming out with.
Such kind words. I really appreciate that. And I'm stoked to see where our collaboration goes in the future. All right. So take
10-4,
care,
man.
everybody.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, everyone, for listening. And until then, we'll talk soon. Bye.
Peace out, y'all.